humans eat foods. They eat foods. And what they're actually doing is they're just trying to move the goalpost.
So this guy's accusing others of moving the goalpost. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, how could you prove? You would have to prove that these foods, which are not ancestral foods, right? Number one, you have to prove that they are safe in a human population, right? That is the only goalpost that matters. Hi everyone. So today we're going to be reacting to the one and only Norton, or Lame Norton, as my friend Bart K likes to refer to him as. He made a video called "Butter versus Seed Oils." Let's see what he has to say.
What's up, guys? Back with another educational video. And this week we are talking about butter versus seed oils. Which is better for mortality, cardiovascular disease, and cancer? But first, you know the drill. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment for the algorithm.
We all that, but do that here, not there.
Okay, so as you guys know, I've done several videos on seed oils now, and usually they get the same vitriolic response, which is the funding source, or seed oils are made like motor oil, or they have chemical solvents in them, they oxidize, they inflame. Okay.
All these may be true or may not be true in the context, right? So listen, as a basic principle, if we are trying to identify, if we assume for the sake of argument that what I'm about to say is not uncontroversial, but I think most people listening to this will agree with it. The standard American diet is the problem, or is a problem, right? As the standard diet, which is now the standard global diet, became adopted throughout the early and then mid and then latter 20th century, all kinds of problems began to skyrocket in terms of the chronic disease, the overall metabolic health of humans, right? If that statement is true, and I think it's more or less true, um, then it follows that there's some component or some components of the standard American diet which are harmful either in isolation or together. And if we look at what meets that timeline in terms of foods that were introduced, you could say sugar, but actually sugar had been around in fairly big quantities since at least the 19th century, in some places since the 18th century. So, okay, you could say processed carbohydrate or like refined carbohydrate. Yeah, maybe. But actually, refined carbohydrate, I don't know. You see, the disease starts before people start eating a lot of refined carbohydrate. Like the first heart attack is somewhere around 1908, 1912, or something like that. And there wasn't really a lot of refined carbohydrate in the diet then. What there was seed oils, which had been introduced at the latter at the very end of the 19th century. Now, correlation is not causation, and from that, it does not follow that seed oils are the problem. However, the precautionary principle tells us that if we want to avoid those foods which may be contributing to disease, seed oils is one of those foods that we should probably be avoiding, right? Just as a matter of first principles.
When it comes to this stuff, it is always easy to find mechanistic data to support whatever it is you want to prove. And in the case of seed,
I think that point is correct. I mean, there's always mechanistic data. Like if we look, for example, at drug trials, for example, we know that the majority of drug trials are not successful, but that there was some mechanism in the lab or even in an animal model, which led to the formulation of the drug and led to it being tried out and eventually didn't work in humans, right? So I think this point that just because you see something in the lab, you can't infer that it's harmful in humans in physiological doses. I think that's completely correct.
you can find animal studies at high doses where they show omega-6 derived fatty acids like linoleic acid from seed oils increase inflammation.
So if I understand that, listen, I won't pretend to be an expert here, but I am, a PhD student still, not only for a couple of weeks, I think, or maybe months. So when I've done my research in these topics, what I found is that it's not so much the linoleic acid; it's the arachidonic acid, if I remember correctly. So which is one of the byproducts. So if you're turning your linoleic acid into arachidonic acid, that's a bigger problem than if you're just eating linoleic acid and it's staying as linoleic acid. So there's a particular enzyme, or I think it must be an enzyme that converts linoleic into arachidonic acid, and if that enzyme is turned on more, or if that gene is turned on more, you're gonna have more problems. So it gets very, very complicated, the discussion around seed oils. So let's see what he has to say.
Oxidative stress, and possibly have some deleterious health effects in high doses in rats and mice. But
Yeah, so again, the problem with you can't really do a long-term study on humans in this regard, right? So the best we have is animal model data. I mean, is it great? No. Is it better than probably any other source? For this particular question, probably. Again, I'm listen, even very good randomized controlled trials we can find problems with, we can poke holes with. So, animal model data is not ideal. But given that I can't take someone at birth and put them on a diet of beef tallow twins, one on a diet of beef tallow, one on a diet of corn oil, and see what happens in 60, 80 years, like that wouldn't be ethical. And I'd have to keep that person in the lab, right? So there's all kinds of practical problems for this. Mice live a lot shorter time. I don't Depends on the species of mouse. Lab mice live very short, like 2 or 3 years, I think. So you could do it there. Will the findings be There's all kinds of problems with that rodent model and inbred and like it has serious problems with that data. I acknowledge that. However, it's going to be better than any kind of epidemiological data or anything like that. It'll at least indicate a hypothesis that needs to be tested further.
Do we care about the effects of ultra high doses in rats and mice, or do we care about what happens in, I don't know,
Why does he talk like this? Why does he do that?
human freaking beings? As I've already covered before, the studies in humans looking at omega-6 derived fatty acids from seed oils show either neutral or positive effects when replacing saturated fat in a 1-to-1 ratio on metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, liver fat, cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, so how long were those studies done for, right? So I think what he's referring to are very short-term studies. I just did another video where we looked at something to do with soy. Yeah, it was trying to prove the safety and efficacy of soy protein, and the studies that guy pointed to were between 6 weeks and 1 year at the very most, right? So I doubt that we have very good data illustrating what he's saying. Maybe in short-term studies, and again, like if I'm putting someone on a diet that increases their butter, I'm taking down the carbohydrate significantly. Was that done in these studies or not?
Cancer possibly, and again,
Cancer possibly, so possibly not, right?
not all studies show benefits to those compounds, but they're at least neutral. There are no studies that I'm aware of looking at actual hard outcome data demonstrating that in 1-to-1 ratios that saturated fat.
So there is a study. I mean, the Minnesota Coronary Experiment and the Sydney Diet Heart study as well, where the people on the corn oil diet died at as a statistically significantly higher rate. Right? That's a randomized control trial that's done. In the case of Minnesota Heart, it's done in like a mental institution, so you have complete control over what they're eating. And the people who were put on the diet of seed oils, they just died of all causes at a higher rate than those who weren't, those who were eating the whatever it was, butter and lard and so on.
Is healthier.
So I'll just say that's an interesting one, and it can't be replicated again for ethical reasons. You can't even do that. It's not. I don't think it was ethical at the time. It's certainly not going to be deemed. It's not going to pass an ethics committee board now to say I'm going to put everyone out of prison on this diet without their free, prior, and informed consent. Right?
For things like insulin sensitivity, metabolic health, liver fat, cardiovascular disease, cancer, compared to polyunsaturated fats from seed oils. Okay, now that we've set the stage, one of the criticisms from people who like to say that seed oils are the root of all these problems is that, well, you can't really compare polyunsaturated fats to saturated fat because, humans eat foods. They eat foods. And what they're actually doing is they're just trying to move the goalpost.
So this guy's accusing others of moving the goalpost. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, how could you prove? You would have to prove that these foods, which are not ancestral foods, right? Number one, you have to prove that they are safe in a human population, right? That is the only goalpost that matters. So, and proving that it's safe in a human population is not going to be over 6 weeks or 6 months. It's going to be over a long term, long scale, right? Otherwise, and I'm sure this guy, listen, all these guys, they don't actually eat the industrialized garbage that they promote, right? I'm sure if you look in this guy's cupboard, you're going to see lots of olive oil. You might see some butter, but you're not going to see any, refined canola, sunflower. You're just not going to find that. The gym bros don't do that. They do olive oil and stuff, right? So I don't know. I'm very skeptical when people are trying to prove foods that are to be safe. When how do we know? We really can't say with any degree of certainty that these industrialized products are safe.
So that there's not any studies looking at directly what they want to account for until now.
Hmm. Until now? Like, why does he have to talk like that? I don't get it.
This study was looking at butter intake versus plant oil intake and the effects on mortality from all intake.
Butter and plant oils intake and mortality. Let's just take a look at this. Okay. Oh, look, nurses' health study. This is all. Why does it always? Why do the people who want to defend potentially harmful foods always go back to the nurses' health study? Always. Why? I mean, so the nurses' health study, for those who don't know, let me just see. Maybe I can find the questionnaire. So it's based on food frequency questionnaires. It was originally to deal with something else. I think hormone replacement therapy or something like that. I forget the exact original purpose of it, but very soon it got repurposed for just for tracking and so on. And you had this kind of nonsense, right? Um, these kind of questionnaires. So this is the original nurses health questionnaire. So it's asking about birth control seems to be the main thing that it's interested in. Then if we go to this kind of data, we see that actually they ask these kind of questions. How often are you taking these foods? And you're being asked over the past year, as you can see from the top there. I couldn't find the original of this, but you're supposed to answer this for over the past year, and it's 1 to 3 times per month, once per week, twice per week, et cetera, et cetera. So how, for most people, how are you gonna remember how many times you had cottage cheese or ricotta cheese over the past year? Like, did you have it weekly? Did you have it monthly? Most people, how are they gonna remember that? And so what happens invariably, and this has been very well documented, is that what happens invariably is that you answer what you think the person asking the question wants to hear, right? So if you self-identify as a healthy person, and healthy people are being told we don't eat butter, we eat margarine or whatever. That's what they were told in the 70s and 80s and 90s. When the majority of this data was collected, they're going to answer more margarine than butter. It has nothing. If you follow them around, if you have two people, one identifies as healthy, one identifies as unhealthy, they could be having exactly the same amount of butter and margarine each. But the healthy, and if you follow them around with a notebook, you'll see that. But the healthy person will over-report the margarine because that's what they were told was healthy at that time, and under-report the butter because butter was not healthy at that, was not seen as healthy at that time, right? Now, the healthy person is doing other things as well. The healthy person is maybe going to the gym. The healthy person is not smoking. The healthy person is not drinking or drinking less or whatever it may be. The healthy person may just be eating less overall. And that's going to result in some kind of difference between those two people, which has nothing to do with whether they were eating butter or seed oils. So the fact that Layne is going on about this particular study, like it's a bit of a joke, right? There's just more nonsense nurses health study stuff. I did a video, I don't know if I did a video or made a blog post recently where I explained that in the same data, in the nurses health count data, one of the biggest food effect sizes you can see is with ice cream. I think with ice cream and diabetics, it was like a 1.8 odds ratio, hazard ratio. So we'll be talking about hazard ratios in just a minute. So that's like if you were a diabetic who ate ice cream, you were 80% less likely to die than if you were a diabetic who didn't eat ice cream, right? Does that make any sense? When you have that kind of data, or was it 60 or 80%, I can't quite remember. But when you have those kind of discrepancies, maybe ice cream's a superfood, and maybe margarine is slightly too. The effect of margarine is going to be way less than the effect of ice cream. I can promise you that. Anyway, let's go.
Versus plant oil intake and the effects on mortality from all causes, cardiovascular disease mortality, and cancer mortality. It was a study of over 200,000 people, men and
So it's not a study of over 200,000 people. Like we have to differentiate between a study that was done with an actual pre-stated end goal in mind and the nurses health study, which was a long process that kept evolving, asking new questions, et cetera, and only really started looking at nutrition, in year, I can't remember, year 2, year 3. It wasn't year 1, right? We saw the year 1 questionnaire was all about oral contraceptives and so on. So we have to sort of figure that you have to sort of, it's not a study designed to answer this question. This is people going back and milking that study that was done, milking those questionnaires and trying to get their papers published. I mean, as John Ioannidis has said, that this kind of practice should basically be illegal. You're going back and looking through old data sets and trying to find some correlation that you want to find, because you're interested in it. So you're trying to find that. And then even worse, you're using models to sort of, you're adjusting for age or adjusting for sex or adjusting for all kinds of things. Although the nurses health study is all women, I think there's the physicians one, which is also included, which is all men, I think. Anyhow, you're adjusting the data until you get some kind of a significant change, and then you publish that. I mean, it's absolutely, it's not research. I don't know what you want to call it. Researchers report what they see. This is not even reporting what you see. This is not seeing anything. This is just asking people what they did, and then you're not even reporting that as if it's just it would be interesting, like if you're doing a psychological study on how people self-report versus what they actually eat, that would be an interesting study, but we don't have that data. No one is following around these people with a notebook. So anyway, this is pretty lame study for Mr. Lame Norton to be citing.
And women that had over 33 years of follow-up. And we'll cut to the take-homes first. Butter increased
15% higher. Okay, so that's an hazard ratio of 1.15. Now, to give you a sense of why I think that is absolutely minuscule and like doesn't make any difference, let's see if I can find something from the same data set. Okay, so this is the exact same data set. So this is the nurses' health study. This paper is called "Smoking and Smoking Cessation in relation to mortality." Right now, if we look here and look at some of the odds ratios there, remember the odds ratio there was 1.15. See what I can find here. Yeah. Yeah. So the odds ratio is here. The hazard ratio is here. 17.31, 13.36. This is smoking and respiratory disease, right? 74 for bronchitis and emphysema, 44. Just to understand, if you, I don't know if you're understanding this with me, if you're following this with me, but so if it was 1.31, that would be a 31% increase. Okay. If it was 10.31, right, that would be or if it was 2.31, that would be 231%. So it would be a doubling, right? We're talking not about a doubling, we're talking about an increase in 17 times, right? So that was 15%. This is 17,000%. Sorry, yeah, 1,700%, right? This one here, 7,400, 7,500% if we do it right. So these are odds ratios which tell you that if you smoke, you're very much more likely than the general population to get a chronic bronchitis or emphysema related disease, right? That is very clear from all the data. 1.15 is entering the realm of could this be noise? And again, there's that John Ioannidis paper that talks about this in great detail and says, look, when you're looking at the nurse's health study or anything like that, anything less than 2, just forget it. And on the minus side, if you're looking at things that had a positive effect, anything less than 0.75, in other words, we're reducing the prevalence of this disease by at least 25%, then it's not really worth even questioning whether it could be causal. So whatever we're seeing here, 1.15, the chances of it being causal are very, 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 very low. Not zero, never zero, but so low that John Ioannidis, who runs one of the best labs in epidemiology and other kind of science out of Stanford, I don't think he would agree to look at this in a randomized controlled trial because the odds ratio is so low, the effect size is so low that it's very, very unlikely to be causal. Something else is going on here that's causing that small effect, or it's just your data's messed up.
the risk of mortality from the lowest intake to the highest intake by anywhere from 15 to 40%. Now, this was depending on
15 to 40% is still not at that 100% threshold that we would like to see to begin to infer that it might be causal.
the statistical models they used. In the end, they concluded with
This is a model. So it's not even the data that they're looking at. They're doing various adjustments. And based on those adjustments, that's the best they can find. The best you can find is a 15 to 40% change. It means it's just nonsense. This is just noise.
the model that butter raised the risk of mortality by 15%. Not only was butter intake associated with a greater risk of mortality from all causes.
So what he just said and what he said there are two different things. He said butter raised the risk of mortality 15%. Nonsense. You cannot say that because that implies causality. What he just said, he corrected himself, butter was associated with a very slight increase, right? So the people who were eating butter in the 1980s and 1990s, and as someone who's alive during that time, I can tell you nobody who had any kind of a health outlook was eating the butter and the margarine. We made fun of our friends who did that stuff as you don't have the canola oil. I made fun of my grandmother for doing that, which turned out to be such a stupid mistake, right? Because she was cooking with her traditional fats, and which would have been much better than the canola oil that I bought for her, right? Anyway, so no one who cared about their health was eating butter at that time. So what does that tell you?
Causes. It was also associated with a greater risk of cancer mortality. It was associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease mortality, but that did not.
So just the odds ratios here, 1.09, 1.04, this is nothing. This is noise, 0.97, 0.96. Even the 1.31 and 1.2, these are all, by all models, all adjusted. Um, yeah, this is just nonsense.
Not reach statistical significance. Now, what about plant oils? Well, plant
Statistical significance is a construct, and they're getting that construct by if you have enough data, if you have enough data points, you can even a small change in prevalence can lead to a big statistical change, right? So I mean, in my view, what you're going to get by a big data set is you're going to amplify the healthy user bias. And again, it's not like a diverse users. It's not like a diverse bunch of people. These are all people. Not vast majority of them are white. I think vast majority of them on the East Coast and a couple of big population centers. So it's a very homogeneous population. And you're going to see, like, if there's a small confounding variable like the healthy user bias, you're going to see that amplified when you just get more data points.
oils were associated with about a 16% decreased risk of total mortality.
16%. So, okay. So that's, again, we're looking at models here. So I don't even know what this means, but a hazard ratio of 0.83. That is not what we want to see. We want to see something at least below 0.75, maybe below zero point 0.7, before we can even begin to infer causality, that it might be causal. Does that make sense? Like 0.83 could just be noise. And again, the fact that it's suggested and that's the best you could do with whatever fancy math you were doing, yeah, not great.
They're also associated with a decreased risk of cancer mortality by about 12% and a decrease.
Again, like, these numbers are not significant enough to be interesting. It could all be explained. I'm not saying it's all explained by the healthy user bias because I don't know, but it could all be explained by the healthy user bias. That is certainly a hypothesis that is consistent with this data.
Decreased risk of cardiovascular disease mortality. And they also did a substitution analysis where they looked at substituting 10-gram increments of butter intake with plant oil, and they found a 17% decreased risk.
What does that even mean? Trying to figure out what they did here. So, plant-based minus olive oil, soybean oil. So this is just a model. Oh, so they didn't do anything in the lab. They didn't even give people oil. They didn't do anything. They're just extrapolating based on those questionnaires. They're saying what would happen if we gave olive oil instead of butter or whatever, right? So it's just nonsense data.
Of total mortality, 17% decreased risk of cancer mortality, and about a 6% decrease in cardiovascular disease mortality, but that did not reach statistical significance. They did a very
So it's really weird modeling. So all you have is the questionnaires. That's all the raw data you have. And then from those questionnaires, from that raw data, you're extrapolating all kinds of things. You see that certain foods associate with better health, and then you're trying to measure that effect size. Like, it's just plain with statistics. If you like doing math, I suppose have fun with that, but it doesn't really tell us anything about the real world, right? The only thing that might tell us something are those original questionnaires, maybe. And all they're really telling us is how people are answering based on, limited ability to recall food and what they think that the people who are sending the questionnaire, what they think those people want to hear.
thorough analysis of this. Not only did they look at total plant intake, but they looked at subcategories of different types of plant oils. And one of the things they did was look at this analysis and see if they pulled out olive oil, did they still see similar results? Now, olive oil is important because even the seed oil haters will acknowledge typically that olive oil is overall neutral or good for you.
Listen, olive oil is just a different process, right? So yes, it has a different fatty acid makeup, and I don't want to talk about MUFAs versus PUFAs and so on in this video. I can talk about it at some other point. But olive oil, has been around since at least Roman times. Actually, I think far before that. I don't exactly remember. Egypt times for sure. So it is a traditional food in the sense that it's been consumed for at least a couple thousand years, whereas these seed oils entered the diet: corn oil, soy oil, cottonseed oil, et cetera, et cetera. They only entered the diet very recently in the late 19th and early 20th century. So again, working from first principles, there's something in the modern diet which is killing us. It probably is not olive oil, right? So in that sense, it's probably very safe, right? And olive oil is also expensive. It's not widely consumed. So that's that. Listen, he's getting boring and repetitive, and I think we're just going to end up just saying the same thing that we've said. So listen, to wrap up, what do we have to say about this? I think the first thing we need to learn, and Layne Layne would be a good person to learn this, is like, we need some humility when we're talking about these things. We cannot say with certainty X causes Y unless we see it in a lot, unless we sort of know um, For example, the association between sugar, eating a carbohydrate-rich diet and or a modern American diet, and developing metabolic disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, etc. That seems to me to be pretty clear. Like that seems to me to be a pretty easy causal statement to say. And it doesn't mean that those things didn't exist before, but their prevalence increased a lot more. So aside from sort of really easy to define first principle statements, we need to be very cautious about what we're saying here. And you can't keep mining the same old nurses' health study for like a million different data points that try to prove that meat is bad, because that was a population that wasn't eating meat because that's what they were told. They were told that was what was healthy. They weren't eating meat, they weren't eating butter, et cetera, et cetera. They were substituting those things out. And we know, looking at the data that happened across the US, we know, looking at the data, that the health outcomes in the 2000s and 2010s was not great. So whatever these guys did, like it's not a good model, right? Anyway, some food for thought. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one.